The pivot point. A pivot point of an object represents its local center and its local coordinate system. So when we transform the object, the pivot point acts like a center. We can adjust that pivot point. To do so, we're going to select an object. All right, so I can come up here, select objects, pick an object. Then I'm going to come over here in my command panel, and I'm going to choose my hierarchy tab. In the hierarchy tab, I have in a rollout here my adjust pivot. When I pick on affect the pivot only, when I pick on this button means that we're going to only apply our changes to the pivot. So the pivot's going to move when we do this. If I choose affect object only, the object will move and the pivot point will stay the same. And if I affect the hierarchy only, then this will be applied so that only the hierarchy will be used to affect rotating scaling of this pivot point. So we're going to change it, say, oh, we're going to affect the pivot point. We end up with, here's the pivot point. I'm going to right click and say move. Now I can move my pivot point anywhere I want on this object, for example. And I can place my pivot point right there if I like. And notice down here, reset pivot. I'm going to reset the pivot. It goes right back to the default values. If I say affect the object only, now when I move, I can move my object and my pivot point stays the same. Okay, so my object is moving, but my pivot point is not. So this is a slightly different. So my pivot point is really staying put, but my object is moving. I'm going to reset that. And of course, I can affect the hierarchy only, and so we'll learn about the hierarchy in later videos. I'm going to go back to affect the pivot only. And let's talk about the alignment area of our rollout. I can change the center, the alignment to go to the center of the object. So picking on this immediately puts the pivot point at the geometric center of the object. Okay, so I can reset that. If my coordinates get all out of whack, maybe I rotate them, right? And in my rotation of the pivots, I get everything out of whack over here, and I say, okay, yeah, that's fine. I come back and pick on it. I can always go back and say align to world, and it puts it back to its world coordinate system. And I can also align it to the object. So when I say align to the object, the move, rotate, scale area is activated, and we can align the center of the object to the we can align this to the center of the object. So here I have a rotate gizmo here, and I'm rotating that and aligning it with the object. Remember, at any time I can go back and reset my pivot back to square one, and I can essentially bail out. All right, so again, my object, okay, I can right click and say move. My object has a pivot point, and when I, for example, when I go down here and I orbit something, right? So I come down here and I orbit. It's orbiting around the pivot point, is where it's orbiting around. So I can change that pivot point by coming into my hierarchy tab, into my pivot, and I can adjust the pivot, and I can adjust the pivot only, or I could affect just the object only or the hierarchy. If I'm on the pivot only, I can choose any one of these three buttons, and I can center that pivot point to the center of the object. Okay, so I can say I want to go to center object, bam, it goes right to the center of the object. Anytime I can reset this thing. So there are times when we need to control our pivot point. to be where we want the pivot point to be, and that's when we're going to come in and adjust this pivot.